Hey everyone. So for my linguistics project, I wanted to focus on slang in the ESL classroom. So essentially, I was interested in this initially because of a book by Josh Katz called Speaking American, where he surveyed like 30,000 or more people. And based on where you lived in the United States, it kind of changed the slang words that you would use for certain things. So, for example, like here, I would refer to a soda as a soda pop. Um, but in the South, they may say a Coke, whether it's Coca-Cola or not. And then another thing that caught my interest is that many people believe that slang is a poor substitute for education or intelligence. So essentially, if you use slang terms or swear, these people believe that that's a sign that you're less intelligent, which just straight up is not correct. So that kind of started my interest, led me into this project. And the three research questions that I was focusing on: first, what are some common slang terms used by local SUU students? Second, does knowing these terms help ESL and international students? And third, what strategies exist to effectively teach slang? So before we get started, there is some important vocabulary that I want to go over. First is slang, which stands for short language. It's casual and informal language that is usually spoken instead of written, and it's associated with a particular group or a specific context. So for this example, students at Southern Utah University. Academic language is typically only used in academics or associated with academics, studying, going to school. And it's necessary for students to have in order to succeed in their education in the United States. Social language, on the other hand, is simple, informal language that is most often used when communicating with family and friends. And then it's important to discuss that knowing or learning slang, like how do we know if someone's actually learned a term? That student would need to be able to identify slang in context. So whether that's spoken, written, um, identify it as slang, use the term appropriately, meaning they use it in the correct way, and also know what situations to use slang and what situations when they shouldn't, and then just essentially understand the meaning. Some more simple vocabulary that's still important: ESL, English as a second language; ELL, English language learners; SLA, second language acquisition; and then IEP, intensive English program. So as long as we have a good grasp on all of those terms, this presentation should make sense. So my first question was, what are some common slang terms used by local SUU students? I think the answer to this question, obviously, everyone uses slang, so it does exist. So I want to address the process that I use to identify these terms. So first, I interviewed U.S. students, and I tried to cast a really wide net when I was focusing on these student groups. I had about 50 people respond. I reached out to ISA members from the US, student involvement and leadership students, student workers in my office, just different places like that. I try to focus on equal numbers of males and females, different majors, different, freshmen, sophomores, juniors, seniors, just as wide and varied as I could in that group of 50. As they were helping me, I also use some personal terms. So I use my personal knowledge, personal experience from growing up in this area, obtaining a degree at SUU and working there to kind of come up with what I was expecting to see. And then with these 50 students, I asked each student to give me a list of their top 10 most used slang terms. Once I got that, I entered it into the computer, distilled that data, and looked for overlap. So for example, if I saw 40 respondents use the same slang term, to me, that's a big indicator that it was a very commonly used slang term. So once I got that, I was able to identify 15 of the most commonly used slang terms. I then interviewed international students. So my group for this was first year international students. So I focused on my acculturation classes, some ESL students, and essentially any student who was international and in their first year fall 2020, spring of 2021. And in this survey, I showed them the term and then used it in an example sentence correctly, and then asked them a few questions. So the major questions were frequency. How often do you hear this slang term? Then I asked them how well they thought they knew the term, like how well do you feel you know it? And if they felt like they knew it, I also wanted to know when they learned it. Was it when you were learning English, before you got to SUU, or after you arrived? Because, potentially as I was processing the data, it would be good to know like when they came across this term. If it was after arriving to SUU, that's a nice indicator that it's more unique to the population I was studying. And then I asked them to write an original example sentence, don't just copy mine, using that slang term, because I had some students who said they knew exactly what the term was, fam, for example, but in their mind, it was short for family, that traditional definition, which is incorrect. So based on the survey results, I could read the example sentence and be like, okay, maybe they don't actually know this term. So after I did this second survey, processed all that data, 5 terms came up as the most commonly unknown. And these are the 5. So first is fam, which is slang for close friends or your people. Salty, irritated, angry, or ornery. Slaps, excellent or amazing. Sus, which is questionable or shady. And then finally, tea, which is gossip or secrets. I guess I'm from a previous generation when we would say spill the beans instead of spill the tea, but essentially tea is the new beans. So these are the terms that I identified as the most unknown amongst the international first year population. And here's some of that data processed down. So with FAM, 55% of the students were unfamiliar with this slang term. 48% were unfamiliar with the slang term salty. 40% unfamiliar or did not know what slaps meant. 62% were unfamiliar with sus. And then finally, 51% didn't know or understand tea. So all of these were fairly significant. Some of the most commonly used terms, for example, like cool, dude, chill, were very universally known, but these were the 5 that were probably the ones that students struggled with the most. Which led me to my second term. Does knowing these terms help ESL and international students? Is it worth it to even try to help them learn this? The answer obviously is yes. There's a lot of research that supports this all across the internet. A lot of articles. For example, the one I used for my research primarily was Entisar El Sharif and Nadia Nasir's article introducing slang to ESLs, ELLs, I apologize. This was actually, theirs was just very thorough and kind of pulled in all the themes that I had seen from a lot of other research. But essentially, the benefits are it helps students socially and in the community. So in their social interactions, knowing slang is going to help them understand what's being said, help them communicate more like the society they're in, and just help them, adapt to the culture and feel at home. It also helps solidify second language acquisition. It gives them a stronger hold on the English language. And there's also benefits within the classroom, even though it is not academic language, primarily because professors are going to use slang and students also use slang. So this is something that's very common they're going to encounter, and there are clear benefits. These are the biggest ones, but there are many, many benefits to knowing slang. So my third question was, we know that there's slang unique to SCU. We know that there are benefits for student knowing it. So how do we effectively teach slang to our students? Again, there is a lot of research that addresses this. And it's mentioned in many articles. One of the best that I used for this presentation, again, because it was very thorough, comprehensive, in-depth, and kind of covered in one article what I had seen across, conversations with ALCC professors, other articles, was the article by Kristen Homuth and Allison Peepo, Their slang or their article is titled Slang in the ESL Classroom. So what they mentioned was a hybrid method, which is essentially just teaching, multiple different ways. So in the classroom, outside of the classroom, online, just hybrid approach, not just using one strategy, but the more you can combine, the better. So they, talked about in-class activities such as example sentences with commonly used slang terms, doing in-class activities to determine if slang is even being used or not, soliciting examples from students, fostering discussions about that, looking up those slang terms together, and then having them use them in original written or spoken sentences. Games, Kahoot is the first one that comes to mind, but a quick Google search will give you many, many resources of different games and activities for teaching slang. Popular culture. So encouraging students to use English pop culture to solidify their grasp on the language. But as they're doing that, also looking and searching for those slang terms. So English movies, TV, songs, social media, YouTube, the more that they can be exposed to it. This is also a really good place to come across slang more frequently. Slang journals. So again, just if they come across slang, write it down and then use the strategies that they learn to look it up and see if they can learn it, or have that journal on hand. So when it's time to have a class discussion, they have things to contribute and ask. But essentially, the most effective method is a combined or hybrid approach, because it allows the students to engage in the material in numerous ways, both inside and outside of the classroom. So the in-class activities and games, encountering it with pop culture, encountering it and looking for it in society, homework activities, slang journals, frequent class discussions. Another key point is frequency. This needs to be addressed regularly throughout the course and integrated through multiple lessons. It cannot just be a one and done lesson. And this approach helps ELLs learn, as well as learn the slang terms, but it also gives them the skills to continue teaching themselves independently after the class is over. So these are kind of the biggest strategies that I came across. So the conclusion: why does this matter? What are the takeaways? Why should I care? Some of it's already been discussed. It's beneficial for social interactions. It gives the students a stronger grasp on the English language, and it allows English language learners to understand slang when it's used in the classroom, because we all know slang gets used in the classroom. There's also a lot of potential for use in intensive English programs, acculturation. For example, I already teach a lesson on communication and etiquette that can easily, introduce this slang and then can be carried forward throughout the semester. So there's a lot of applicability within SUU and with all of us as well. We're pursuing a TESL certification. Hopefully we will be intensive English program educators. So this is something that's, I think, really cool to be aware of now, and something that could really benefit students. So there's a lot of potential for everyone listening to this, essentially. And then the takeaway, the final point, the thesis, if you will, is that IEP educators really need to focus on academic and social language when they're teaching. Academics makes sense, right? If they're in an intensive English program preparing to study for university, they need that, but they need the social side of it just as much. And teaching that will help them learn the academic side as well. So thank you all so much for listening to my presentation. I had a lot of fun doing this project. I'm very excited to see what you come up with as well. And I hope everyone has a great summer and a great end of the semester.